I agree, first of all, is going to be one that I'm really interested to know the result of. Whether or not Control, Esper Control, can hang with a deck like Sultai, something that's a value threats with blue cards out of the sideboard. It feels like one of the questions I really want to answer about Standard.
It's hard to imagine that Donegan's not prepared, right? After the deck won last weekend, and then the Jessups are on it as well, you have to assume that you're planning on beating up on last week's big deck as it is.
Thought Erasure, turn 2 from Donegan. We'll see. Sees the hand of Hydroid Krasis, Vivian Reed, Carnage Tyrant, and 2 more lands.
This feels like a situation where Brier just knew what Donegan was on going in. They may just be friends outside of the event, but this is a very slow hand, but it's a very powerful hand.
Yeah, now Brier on a mulligan to 6 here as well, as he just passes back. Yeah, right, the cards you're hoping to avoid that can really, in the early game, are things like Growth Chamber Guardian.
Exactly. Here, Donegan's just going to get to kind of play his game, develop a little bit with some lands, maybe have a Chemister's Insight slipped in there, and get to set up and answer things one at a time while he, snowballs an advantage.
Donegan passes back, leaving up Absorb mana. And Aiden's not willing to commit into that. You see land 5 and has the Vivian Reed, but says no and passes the turn. Now, the risk here is that Teferi plus here draws a card from Donegan, and now it's unclear whether or not Aiden has a good response.
Exactly. So now there's an issue from Aiden where before it just didn't feel like the onus of action was on him, but now he has to do something or he'll fall so far behind.
Vivian Reed from Aiden Brier hits a copy of Negate from Donegan. He has 2 copies in the main. Thanks to Teferi, who did have the mana up for it.
The game at this point may not literally have concluded, but getting to untap with the Teferi is pretty close to just putting this out of reach for Aiden.
Yeah, and Aiden knows it too. His hand was a land and a Carnage Tyrant. That Carnage Tyrant was about to get erased from his thoughts, and that is going to be good enough for him. Donegan on the board.
Yeah, that was the point where Brier kind of knew that he was not going to win in terms of card advantage, and Carnage Tyrant was just going to provide a sort of virtual card advantage where it's something where it is one card that cannot be answered by any number of Donegans, presumably at least. And it's also a way that I can just get that Teferi off of the table and actually let Brier start kind of trying to get back into that game.
Right, so a clean one here. Now these matchups, and a strength of Sultai midrange is what it can do out of the sideboard. It usually improves all its matchups after board. I'm looking at these blue cards that he can be able to go for.
Right, so we see Negate out of the sideboard, we see Thief of Sanity, we even see Duress. There's almost a transformational sideboard plan where you have to do a whole lot to respect the aggro decks with your main deck, because there's a chance that you draw the right half of your deck and can kind of eventually snowball an advantage against Control. But red will just kill you while you're trying to find your anti-aggro cards. So you're incentivized to load up on your aggro hate main deck and then board into your Control hate.
Right, so we do see the sideboards here. So Duress and Negate from Aiden both figure to be very good here. Now, out of Dylan's side, I'm more interested is whether or not you look at cards like Thief of Sanity or Hostage Taker in this sort of matchup, or whether Dylan wants to go for threats.
Sure. So this is one where it's all just about grinding and making sure that you actually get to check whatever it is that Brier is doing and having your cards make more cards. We keep bringing up card advantage because that's really what matters here. Ultimately, if you deal 20 points, you're going to win, but it's not life totals that people are fighting over. You're going to end up where both players have 1 million lands on the battlefield and are just kind of jamming these huge, these rares, these mythics, these very powerful cards that cost 4, 5, and 6 mana, deciding who it is that wins, who is going to win the game.
Do you see that? Some innovations here on Dylan's side. That Basilica Bell Haunt, we saw some of those last weekend as well.
It's a very nice one against the red decks. You can't Lightning Strike it down. It blocks everything, and it gains you a little bit of life.
And Dylan Donegan mentioned a former Invitational winner and a former competitor at the Players' Championship, currently 28th in our 2019 season standings here.
It's early, too, so that's a spot where it may sound like it's low on the leaderboard, but one, he is on the leaderboard, which is very relevant, and two, it's not by a very wide gap. A strong finish this weekend could just skyrocket him to the top. A big draw to these Hostage Taker and Thief of Sanity-esque cards is they are going to just get Brier if he leans too hard on these negates and duresses. We talked about it a bit before. There's that dynamic where if they make this huge anti-spell plan, then they're going to just die to a dumb 2/2 with evasion.
Right. It's that strategy when you have an all-spells deck that can board into just a couple of threats. What you get to do is you get to play a control deck, and you can force your opponent to keep bad cards in against you.
Yes, exactly. And it's, again, a self-fulfilling thing where you attack your opponent who is pivoted into a spell-heavy anti-spell deck, and all of a sudden your Thief of Sanity starts seeing duress and negates of your own.
Kind of reminds me of some of the strength when you used to see twin decks getting played. So this was a control deck, and then if they ever tried to board out all the removal against you, then you get them.
Yep, exactly. You end up a spot where they go, okay, this game's going to be about Cryptic Command and Keranos, and all right, I'll play my tap land on 2, go, or on turn 3, go, and your opponent goes, all right, Deceiver Exarch, and you just go, not like this.
Yeah.
Not like this.
Dylan Donegan, no stranger to the twin-style strategies, and that was legal and modern.
Oh, absolutely not.
Was his go-to deck.
He was one of the innovators of the Grixis one, if I remember correctly.
And game number 2 will put Aiden Brier on the play.
A nice thing about the play-draw dynamic, especially when Brier has these Thief of Sanities of his own out of the sideboard, you do get a chance to actually stick one of these Thief of Sanities before Donegan has any sort of counterspell to be able to check it. There is a chance, I would even say it's very likely, that Donegan's left in removal of his own, but it does force Donegan to start committing mana into it and letting you possibly get to sneak in some of your own counterspells.
We will get a look over at Donegan's hand. It's one of those sideboard duresses from Aiden Brier. Taking a look at it, not only has Dylan brought in the Thief of Sanities, he has 2 copies of them in the hand. To go with it, he has lands 2 and 3, Cast Down, Chemister's Insight, and Teferi.
Well, you'd like to take Thief.
Yeah. This is a hand it's scary on Aiden's side because, right, sure, he's got a duress, which is great in the matchup, but if he can't answer these Thieves of Sanity, it feels like this may not matter.
Exactly. You know, you're probably in a spot where it looks like Brier has a Thief of Sanity of his own, so he's taking this cast down to try and just get a chance to connect with his Thief of Sanity, but that might just not work, especially when Donegan can just deploy his own as a blocker.
And here is that Thief of Sanity first from Aiden Brier. And Dylan will make his own.
All right, this is kind of Aiden's moment.
It's a big ask to say that Aiden would have removal spells still in the deck.
Exactly. So there's a point where Aiden may still have Assassin's Trophy. Is the card that we would be looking for here, as that's something that can also answer a Teferi or one of the other bigger permanents. It can even answer a flipped Ascanta.
Right, the worry is that if you Assassin's Trophy here, then you're ramping your opponent into a possible Teferi.
Look, it doesn't feel good.
Now, Jadelight Ranger, a follow-up from Aiden Brier. He gets his land for the turn. Now he's deciding whether or not he wants that duress that's on top of his deck.
This is a spot where it's basically going to come down to whatever Aiden thinks he's going to be doing next turn. If he wants to make sure that he's spending all of his mana every turn, he likely can't afford the duress, but it is such a powerful effect. You're probably just leaning into it rather than binning it.
Overgrown Tomb does play. It's Llanowar Elves for Brier.
We also see a Carnage Tyrant hiding out in Brier's hand, so the thought may have been if you're trying to stick this Carnage Tyrant next turn and just try to get Donegan as dead as quickly as possible, that's a good way to do it.
Now, rather than playing that second Thief of Sanity, Donegan leaves up mana here. We both know about Chemister's Insight. However, in the meantime, it looks like Donegan has picked up Vraska's Contempt as well. Either way, Duress will take a look at the hand. And yeah, those are the 2 4-mana cards.
That is a lot of card draw spells.
Yeah, we have a Precognitive Perception, the one of in Dylan's deck. That's the card over there right on top of the Teferi.
If we look, other than Vraska's Contempt, everything here theoretically draws cards. This is the strength in these decks, is you have all of your threats. The way that they're threatening is that they just make more cards. Right? Rather than actually trying to kill your opponent, you just generate an enormous advantage that your opponent can't break through, and you win when you get around to it.
Aiden will take the Teferi. And a lot of times when your opponent has so much card draw, you're going to see a player go toward taking everything else, removing Vraska's Contempt in that situation. However, because his threat is Carnage Tyrant, there's not really a need for him to do that.
To quote, let's just, I assume the quote here is something to the effect of, you look at the Vraska's Contempt and you look at the Carnage Tyrant and you go, who cares? What are they going to do? Vraska's Contempt to Jade Light Ranger? I hope so.
I mean, here's an attack. We'll see. Looks like Dylan going to take 4, instead going to go for this Chemister's Insight.
Right, we saw Donegan kind of low on lands, and that's the way these decks tend to lose, is they have all these card draw spells, but if you don't actually cast them, they don't do anything until you cast them. And that sounds like most cards, but the issue is they don't have any immediate effect when you cast them.
Land 5 and Precognitive Perception from Dylan. So he casts this main phase, which means he gets to scry 3 before he draws 3.
We've seen people play Foresight before. How much better is this?
The card's pretty good. At the very worst is Jace's Ingenuity, which is a 5-mana draw 3. He puts all 3 cards to the bottom. I'm imagining looking for things like Kaya's Wrath in this situation. He's going to have to be able to clean up.
Right, and we saw bottom on that scry, so we do know he is digging for a specific piece.
The Sultai mid-range matchup can be a bit scary right now from the Esper side. When your opponent's boarding in so many cards like Negate and has these cards like Hydroid Krasis, it's hard to play around.
Exactly. So we see, Jade Light Ranger drew a card. It was just a land, but it was a card. This is ultimately just a battle of resources. So when you see so many things just replacing themselves on both sides, that's how these games end up taking a long time and being such grindy affairs.
And I love this. An attack in for 6 puts Dylan Donegan down to 10.
That's lethal.
It's lethal next turn with the Krasis. Not to mention, Aiden got to cast a big Muldrifter here, right? Even if Kaya's Wrath does come from Dylan's side, that's fine.
You would call this a Muldrifter.
Well, a Cloud Blazer.
A Cloud Blazer. There we go.
It gained 2, drew 2.
Thank you. Your respect is appreciated.
Vraska's Contempt takes care of the Krasis. Donegan had to shock for it, so down to 8, back up to 10. Cast down takes care of Jade Light Ranger. And that'll be the turn for Dylan.
And all of a sudden, the battlefield looked a little smaller.
Still 3 power in play for Aiden. We go back. He has that Carnage Tyrant. The danger is that his board almost has already forced a Wrath. So by committing Carnage Tyrant to it, he is exposing himself to just Kaya's Wrath, closing out the game.
That's true, but there's also a point where last turn was a pretty juicy board for a Kaya's Wrath.
Right.
So if Donegan didn't have it there, what are the odds he has it exactly right now?
And that's the math he does. Says, all right, plays Carnage Tyrant, now just forcing Donegan to actually have the sweeper.
Exactly, and there's a point where if you just wait, the longer you wait, the more likely it is Donegan has the Wrath. Because if you give Donegan a ton of time, Donegan can just 1-for-1 all of your other creatures with removal spells like Vraska's Contempt and Cast Down, like we saw last turn. And you actually just need to do something else and force Donegan to have some.
Yeah, and Donegan picks up the cards. I actually really like the line from Aiden. So if he doesn't make Carnage Tyrant there, then something like Teferi plussing and drawing a card. Donegan goes to 4, next turn pluses again, plays a bunch of removal with Teferi, and suddenly your Carnage Tyrant's not going to win.
Exactly. You end up in a spot where, there's a spot where Donegan could even just put up blockers if he were to have something, if he has Lyra in his deck, if he ends up having these Thief of Sanities, which are not killing it. I want to be very clear, they're not killing it, but they are life gain spells that just buy Donegan more time to find those Kaya's Wraths, and this is all a spot where Sultai just needs to win in the mid game before Esper takes over and just has, say, 10, 12 lands in play and just starts getting to play a card draw spell and 1 or 2 removal spells every turn to just deal with whatever it is that Aiden tries to commit onto the battlefield.
Now, on our other matches, Peter Tubergen, a winner with Dredge in the first game over Grixis Shadow, and Timothy Schulz with Lands, just picking up that first game over Noah Walker.
Both somewhat unsurprising. Those are pretty favorable game ones in each of those directions.
Lands is an interesting one over in the Legacy seat. This was the standby deck. There was a deck that everybody wanted to be playing in these team constructed events. About a year ago, a lot of Lands players actually have started to put down the deck in favor of things like Grixis Delver or Turbo Depths.
Turbo Depths is a particularly attractive option if you're into that style of deck that's difficult to interact with but still has this combo finish, quote unquote, because that's the way that the Lands deck tends to win the most frequently anyway, so you're more committed to the way that your Lands deck got to be proactive previously, but your games just aren't taking as long.
February's creature from the Creature Collection is now available at Star City Games. This is Yeti Steady Go. Our Yeti now available on playmats and sleeves. This guy's ready for the cold snap we had recently.
I just want to boop its snoot. Yeah. It pokes up, it's white, and it's smiling at the camera.
I like this teapot as well.
Look at
it's
his
adorable.
Eyes. Are those fingers or toes?
Ooh, okay.
They're cold is what they are.
They're cold, yeah. He's got 4 of each.
It's all right. This Yeti is ready to go.
This one now available this month at the Creature Collection. Of course, our previous creatures available as well. StarCityGames.com/Creature Collection. Now, for those of you watching us online on Twitch, I also want to talk about our Twitch subscription program. We have it in our feature match area. For subscribers here this weekend, you can participate in sub-only chat, as also you get to decide the quarterfinals. That means on Sunday, so tomorrow, once we cut to those last 8 rounds, you can vote for the players you'd like to see toward the end of the tournament.
That's one of my favorite parts of being in it myself. Is I know what magic I want to see, so I'm going to do what I can to make my voice heard and watch that magic.
And we will have a top 8 for this team event as well, so 24 decks to choose from.
That's good math. That's good math.
The second game there, Aiden Brier evens things up. It felt like there was a lot of pressure on Dylan's side to have sweepers in this matchup. Now, a lot of times you'll see Cleansing Novas or Settle the Wreckages. I want to look at Dylan's list. These 4 Kaya's Wraths are actually the only sweepers he has in the main or sideboard.
So that's something where you kind of needed to check exactly Carnage Tyrant, but otherwise we saw that game where Donegan was pretty comfortable just mopping everything else up with single spot removal spells.
Yeah, and I guess as far as Carnage Tyrant is concerned, Thought Erasure is an answer to Carnage Tyrant, which Dylan has 4 copies of.
Exactly, and we saw that was what was about to happen during the first game, and when Aiden packed his cards up is when that exact pattern was about to occur.
Both players on 6 cards here, so they're shuffling. Yeah, I do think this Esper control deck is pretty interesting. It's more spot removal than you'd expect out of a control deck. And very little counter magic. We have these 4 absorbs, and he has 2 negates. That's it for counter spells. Otherwise, Moment of Craving, Thought Erasure, 3 Mortifies, 3 Vraska's Contempts. A lot of 1-for-1.
Yeah, exactly. But with all of the card draw in the deck, you just juice back up.
And both players on 6 here for the deciding game. Aiden starts out with Llanowar Elves. One of the things I always feel concern about when I play a deck like Esper on the mulligan is this is a deck that really needs to hit 4 mana on turn 4.
Right, so you do get this scry with the mulligan, which helps you there. All you need to do is hit your land drops, which can be pretty concerning, but as long as you don't die, you can be fine. I know that sounds a little bit self-fulfilling, but the biggest concern here is just dying before you get to play a game of Magic, and when your opponent's mulliganing as well, you've got to feel pretty okay about your odds to just get time.
This is an interesting one. So Aiden Brier's hand was 2 copies of Jade Light Ranger, a Thief of Sanity, a Duress, and a Forest. There's actually no black mana in the hand, but despite that, because there's 2 Jade Light Rangers, Dylan took that Thief of Sanity anyway.
Right, so if Dylan doesn't instantly have a removal spell for this Thief of Sanity, then he might just lose the game, right? This worst case scenario, this Jade Light Ranger might deal, let's say, 9 points of damage, but it didn't draw a ton of cards.
Well, speaking of Thief of Sanity, Dylan has one of his own. This is out of the sideboard, and it's going to be there on turn 3.
Also could have been looking to pave the way for this.
Yeah, there was no removal that he saw. This can work. Jade Light Ranger attacks in. Now, this is the second time we've seen Esper Control and Standard board into Thief of Sanity. It feels like they're just going to do that every matchup.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to. It's pretty bad against the aggressive strategies because it's just a 3-mana 2/2 against mono white, against red, which is playing Shock these days. But anything that where the most important thing is how many cards both players have, this card's just kind of a gimme.
Aiden attacks in with the Ranger. He doesn't have a removal spell for the Thief of Sanity, but he does have a blocker. 2/2 Hydroid Krasis was the play for the turn. He's hoping that he can untap with this one.
If Donegan doesn't have a removal spell, that counts as a removal spell for this Thief of Sanity, effectively.
Donovan's going to shock a Godless Shrine into play and then just pass.
That's good for Aiden.
Yeah.
That's one less turn of attacking with Thief of Sanity. We take those.
And back to Aiden we go. He has not found black mana just yet. Hand is Vivian Reed, a Duress, a couple other cards.
Is that Vivian, black spell, black spell, black spell? No, there has to be another Jade Light Ranger in there.
Yeah, there's one Jade Light that we both know about.
Right.
And Aiden still, to hold back that blocker, attacks with just Jade Light Ranger.
It's a pretty easy serve here. You're happy if the trade happens.
Yeah. And Dylan does decide to trade away his 2/2.
Have you ever seen a Kaya's Wrath telegraphed so hard in your life?
Yeah, well, Dylan's going to need the land for it. As here's Jade Light Ranger, he Chemister's Insights. Island doesn't cast Kaya's Wrath.
Well, it's a good thing Dylan plays 26 or 27 of those. That's when you want to draw them.
Aiden draws 2 off the Jade Light Ranger, and one of them's Woodland Cemetery, and we'll see a Duress. Duress shows Teferi absorb 2 lands. Not only is the Kaya's Wrath not there, but he's going to lose the Teferi.
So the thought here, rather than playing to the Kaya's Wrath, was more just trying to clean up the board to pave the way for this Teferi.
Yeah. And passes with just a counterspell in Dylan's hand. Dylan will need some help. Top card does not deliver. It's just another Hallowed Fountain.
Listen, Absorb is a legal Magic card, and Dylan plans to cast it.
Yeah. 5 power on the board for Aiden Brier. He's going to swing in 4/5. Dylan down to 10. It's a 3-turn clock. Now that Absorb will check the Vivian Reed.
It will. It checks Vivian Reed, and then even if Brier decided not to cast anything here, Donegan would get to flashback Chemister's Insight, which just digs him closer to action. So this is actually pretty heads up for Brier.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that play, right? Because normally you don't run your 5-mana Planeswalkers into a counter spell.
Exactly, but if it looks like there's nothing that Donegan can do anyway other than get closer to the cards that put him back in the game, like Kaya's Wrath, trading your Vivian for an Absorb is fine if it means that it stymies Donegan's development for another turn and makes him use his mana in a less efficient way going forward.
And some other big news for Aiden, he has another copy of Vivian Reed that he was setting up for. That's going to be the play. And Dylan extends the hand. His hand was 3 lands, and onboard Vivian is difficult enough to deal with. And so that'll be 2-1 Aiden Brier, your winner here with Sultai midrange.
Yeah, there's a point where maybe Donegan wasn't literally at 0 life at that point, But if we're being honest, so Donegan had to draw a Kaya's Wrath in order to mop up the battlefield, and then also had to deal with a Vivian Reed. There's just way too many things that Donegan had to deal with there for it to be realistic for him to actually win that game. It's likely better served for Donegan to maybe go consult with his teammates in their games that are closer than that.
Yeah, and there isn't that one clean answer that he can draw to, which is one of the difficult things, right? There's no planar cleansing in Standard, something like that.
Exactly. So the only way that Donegan could really have won that game from that point is having, say, a Vraska's Contempt on the Vivian, Brier commit whatever the Vivian drew him onto the board, and then Donegan rip a Kaya's Wrath as well. That's a tall order.
There's so many things that are difficult there. In so many ways that even that doesn't work. Say the Vivian Plus finds Hydroid Krasis. What are you doing from the control side at that point?
Losing.
Yeah. All right, fair enough.